Yeah, you could think of it like one, like the number two.
Okay, cool. Hello and welcome to episode 161. It's a pleasure today to be joined by Matthew Stialisis. And a little bit about him is that he's the author of 4 books, most recently the National Books bestseller Craft in the Real World, and the 2021 finalist for the Faulkner Award for Fiction Disappear Doppelgänger Disappear. Adopted from Korea, he has written about adoption, race, and Asian American masculinity in the Best American Essays 2020, NPR's Code Switch, the New York Times blog, Motherlode, and The Guardian, among other media outlets. He has taught fiction and Asian American literature and studies at the University of Houston, Coe College, Oklahoma State University, and various community writing centers, as well as at the Tin House, One Story, and Kundiman writing conferences. BuzzFeed has named him one of 32 essential Asian American writers. Good morning slash afternoon. How are you today?
Hello, hello. Thanks for having me.
Oh, such a pleasure. And I know, like we were talking about before we were recording, that you're gonna be doing many of these, and I'm so appreciative that I'm able to spend this time with you. Book, people will be listening to this on Tuesday the 17th. The book is out in
The
the
book is
future.
out. Yeah,
Today's the
yes.
14th, but the book's out in the future. What Tell us a little bit about any readings or bookstores or did you really like to highlight? I know you got a lot coming up.
Yeah, I've got a launch party tonight, in the
Okay.
future, tonight at Books Are Magic on Montague Street with Kirsten Chen, who's my BFF from
Yeah.
grad school, author of a great best-selling novel called Counterfeit.
Mm-hmm. Very cool. Are you when you say launch party, I mean, are we talking champagne? Are we talking like,
Oh yeah,
okay.
champagne,
Okay.
caviar, we'll
Yeah,
have it's on a yacht.
obviously. I just
Yeah,
assumed
yeah.
that. Okay. All right.
Jeremy Lin will be there.
All right. All right. That's awesome. Well, so it's exciting stuff. Obviously you've been through it before, but this book's already gotten a great write-up in the Boston Globe. I want to say the Washington Post as well.
Yeah, the Walpole one was amazing.
All right. That's so cool. And I mean, do you feel like it's a departure from what you've done before? Like, I mean, to call it a basketball book is limiting, but I mean, some different subject matter, but maybe not so much. Do you feel like it was a departure for you?
No, I don't feel like it's a departure. I guess I can see a kind of arc through the books, but so maybe like an evolution or something,
Okay.
like a Pokemon. It's like the third stage now, right? It's
Okay.
the they're the big Pokemon.
Okay. Awesome. So I'd love to talk just a little bit about growing up and your relationship with the written word. This was in Craft in the Real World, which is, an absolute classic, instant classic. You quoted as saying or writing, quote, as a child, I used to read fiction for exactly this sense of agency, to feel that the world which felt so out of my control could be controlled. What what did that lead you to reading? I mean, were you reading like high fiction? I remember is a term I think you use in Craft in the Real World. Were you reading fan fiction? Were you reading what were you into as a kid, and kind of how did that inform your later writing even?
Yeah, maybe high fantasy. Is that what you're thinking of?
High fantasy, I'm sorry, what did I say? High
High
fantasy.
fiction. I was
Oh,
wondering what that
pardon
one was.
me. I just made that up. I just made
Or
that up.
high,
Forgive
yeah,
me.
yeah, high fiction. It's like what you read when
Pardon
you've
me.
smoked a lot of pot and
Right.
yeah. No, I was reading a lot of like what became later kind of Harry Potter, but the like Narnia and
Okay.
other book, the Susan Cooper Darkest Rising series,
Mm,
a lot of books that were either like kids entering into a kind of high fantasy world or
okay.
that were just kind of straight fantasy. I remember I read like these books about like a princess who was captured by dragons, but then was just like made friends with them and was
Hmm.
hanging out with them.
Mm.
Yeah, but so a lot of times these books, right, were like kids or younger adults who felt like outsiders and didn't have a lot of control over their lives, were bullied or whatever,
Mm.
seen as different. And then they found out, right, that they were like the main character of this totally other world that's built around
Mm.
them. And they have lots of powers in this other world and they kind of can have control over the things they didn't have control over in the
Hmm.
regular life. And I think that's kind of a common uh thing that kids deal with a lot. I know my
Hmm.
kids are always trying to test out how much control they have, right? How much power they
Sure.
have.
Sure.
Like no is probably the first thing, but then now my 6 year old is going through this phase of just saying exactly the opposite of whatever he actually wants. And then when I grant that, he's like, "No, I didn't mean that. I want the other thing." And then I grant
Okay.
that, and he says the it's
Yeah.
just like
How did
this.
you not know that? Right? How did you not know this?
I know, I know.
Okay. I don't know that I've ever read an author who uses the word like solipsis as much as or solipsism as much as like Tobias Wolff would. It's like so many times. But I guess you're kind of talking about that a little bit of like creating a world for yourself. Like, did you feel, I guess, to ideas of representation too, like, could you have said at that age, like, oh, I'm searching for representation in whatever way that you were, or is
No,
that
there really
something?
was no
Yeah,
representation at that
none.
age. It's pretty new concept. Yeah, I mean, for Asian Americans at least, and for adoptees especially, there was really nothing. I think I had one book. It was called like "We Adopted You, Benjamin Koo," and for a long time, I've written about this somewhere, but for a long time, I kind of mistook the details of my life for the details of this character's life, just
Wow.
because it was the only thing that I had. It became this
Mm.
kind of like arch narrative.
Oh my gosh. Is that kind of a paternalistic book? I didn't even know the book, but just the title, "We Adopted You." Does it come off as very paternalistic, like almost like we saved you?
Yeah, it's a kind of well, it's not. It doesn't go that far. I think it's. I remember, it's definitely written by an adoptive parent or somebody kind of adjacent to that, and then, but I think I remember it having some note about asking adoptees about the story, but it's kind of like a very young child's perspective, if anything. Yeah, and then from so it's hard to say that it's really like what you feel when
Right.
you're right because you're too young to actually express that to somebody else who's writing a book about you,
Sure,
right?
sure. So many different layers there. What were you reading as you got into high school and college? What were some of those books or some of those formative writers who just made you kind of see what was possible, I guess?
Yeah, I was reading mostly just stuff assigned for school. I must have been reading other things too, but I was reading like I remember hating basically everything that I read for school except for The Great Gatsby. Um, there was like The Color Purple, which I hated at the time. Everybody hated in my
Uh,
class, but then I reread it, as an adult, and I
sure.
realized it was like absolutely an amazing book.
Oh yeah.
Just wasn't ready for it.
Uh,
I was reading was Catcher in the Rye, which I also reread, but I still think is a terrible book.
okay.
Uh, you know, yeah,
You're a phony. What a phony you are, man.
yeah.
Okay. That's a great line. You read it again and you still didn't like it. So as far as your own writing, I mean, have you been writing ever since you were a kid along with that reading? Like what was there a eureka moment or moments where your work resonated with people, your work resonated with yourself? It was like, wow, I can do this.
No, I grew up with parents who were both school librarians, and so I kind of they were always, books were always a part of our lives, and
Hmm.
the books were like the one thing that they would kind of always buy for us. So we kind
Yeah.
of had books around often. Books were presents at every holiday, and so I did feel like the world of books was one that I could enter into, even when I felt like um, the kind of identity markers that set me as different in real life were still a part of the world of books. But I remember, in maybe middle school, I wrote what I thought was a really long novel, which must have been like 100 pages. It was fan fiction of the Redwall series. I
Okay.
think my middle school has it in their library still, or maybe they've
Your
gotten rid of
novel?
it by now.
They have your
Well,
novel?
this
Oh, it's gonna be
old
part
like
of, oh man.
it's about like a Wolverine and a alligator or something.
Oh man. You got the archive at your school library. That's cool. Oh man. Oh man. So up until today, I know you're an educator as well, obviously. The book is so much about workshop and everything and crafts in the real world, but what who are the writers and readings that are really thrilling you? And maybe it's an interminable list, but also like your students, who are they really responding to?
the students are really into Katie Kitamura.
Okay.
I've heard her name a lot. I also really like her books. A few years ago, it was, I mean, I think they go through these like phases, right?
Hmm.
But this is the kind of big influence right now, it seems like. And then also uh some British writer who's very famous that I'm forgetting the name of,
Hmm.
um, who writes about like just upper middle class white women. I don't know. It's
Hmm.
like a HBO show or something now. You know what I'm talking
Okay.
about?
Sounds vaguely familiar. Okay. Okay.
um, so they're, it's kind of like these narrators who are disaffected, stand at a kind of distance from themselves,
Hmm.
and then kind of observing the world around them and these friend groups in which they like, feel close to but don't really belong to, or feel like they don't belong to.
Okay. Hmm. I would love to talk about, you of course have had so much success before. And we could talk, I don't want to take 6 hours of your time. We could talk about all this, but the sense of wonder, is, I believe this was in the interview, you said something to the effect of, what really appealed to me is that I could write a book about K drama, and then K drama or Korean drama, and then legitimately call it research. Um, and it's, I'm so interested to know about how much is based on Jeremy Lin and Lin Sanity and all of that. I want to say 2012, that was 2013.
2012, yeah.
Okay. So it's a basketball book. It's a book about so many other things. I just love to know some of the seeds for the book.
Yeah, so Linsanity definitely was an early seed for the book. I probably mapped out some kind of story, around one story, and Linsanity maybe a year or two after that, and then wrote the first half of the book about one who is a kind of Lin type character, except for Korean
Uh-huh.
American, um, and then a few years later, I wrote the second half of the book from Carrie Kong's perspective, and Carrie is a producer of K drama, and so it was sort of. I remember thinking at the time, I'm just going to write now about the things that I just want to
Hmm.
do and I think are fun, and then it'll also like allow me to then call the times when I'm watching basketball on TV or K
Yeah.
drama on TV research for the
Nice.
novel. Yeah, because I remember, like you kind of have to carve out time, right?
Hmm.
And I had a family, and I always felt bad for taking that time. And my wife would be like, "You're not really, you should be writing." And I'm like, well, this is writing, kind of. And then I felt like was a way to legitimize that.
There you go. I wonder about any challenges. I mean, it's a semi-fictional storyline, like you said. I mean, if you, I mean, I consider myself a pretty big, I mean, big basketball fan, and so I knew, I remember Jeremy Lin and the story around that. But like, because it is semi-fictional, like, did you feel any pressure to not veer away too much, or and
Oh
then also,
no,
go ahead.
no. Yeah, it's totally fictional. It's
Yeah.
I just kind of took the basic facts of what
Hmm.
happened for those 2 weeks, and both like the kind of the way the media saw it while he was winning, and then the way the media saw it after he had lost, and then
Right.
what happened kind of with his contract at the end of that season, where
Right.
the Knicks were like, go find another offer and we'll match it. Right.
Uh-huh.
And then he finds another offer, and then they're like, actually, we're not going to match it. See you
Yeah.
later.
Yeah. Did he go straight to Houston after New York?
He went to Houston. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, I thought in the book I was like, okay, he's gonna go to Houston. Nope. Nope. Did not
Yeah,
do that.
so
Okay.
spoilers, but
Yeah.
I didn't want it to kind of end the way that Insanity ended.
Sure. Sure. So there's a lot within the book about like triangles and like, I get, literal love triangles, and then triangles of like, I don't know, jealousy or revenge is too strong of a word, but like some sort of payback. You have Powerball. This is Paul Burton, and Powerball every single time in the book, that's his nickname. He's described. He has an exclamation point after his name.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
love
So
that.
he's
I love that.
legally changed his name to Powerball exclamation point. Yeah, which I thought was
What's
funny.
the rationale on that? I thought it was so cool.
Oh, when I was watching a lot of sports, this must have been what, like early late 2000s,
Uh-huh.
the aughts. There was like this trend of people changing their names, right? Like Meta World Peace,
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Ochocinco,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Chad Ochocinco.
Ocho Cinco.
And I thought it'll be fun. Like I'll just have him change his name. But what would be really, or like the artist formerly known as Prince, right? Prince went
Mm-hmm.
for like the symbol for a little while.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I thought it'd be fun to make people have to write exclamation point every time they wrote your name. You know, like if I was going to change my name and people were going to write about me, what would I want?
Yeah,
I want them to like be forced to exclaim about me every time.
that's so cool. Like the book starts off with, I mean, I guess an epigraph you would call it. It's a line. It's a real line from the New York Times about how I guess scouts were saying that, like, Jeremy Lin, he like lacked a comparison.
Yeah, there wasn't a frame of reference for it.
Wasn't a frame of reference, right? I don't know your basketball knowledge going back, but I don't know if you remember like Keith Van Horn,
Yeah, Keith Van Horn.
right?
Uh-huh.
I always remember when he came out, he was compared to Larry Bird,
Right.
white player, and he said, I don't know why it always has to be, racially the same. I always feel like I'm more of like Derek McKee, who I thought was not a great
Uh,
player, but Derek McKee was a solid player. It was kind of a random comparison, but I was like, I get that.
yeah, that seems a little
Right,
random.
right, right. Um, but then, and this second or third page or so, or maybe the first, there's the joke. We have Robert Sung, who's a journalist. It's a joke about about an Asian American basketball player, and it's dealt with again towards the end of the book. But we have, like you said, Juan Lee, who's in some ways described as the same as Robert Sung, but not. They're both 6'2". They were point guards, and they both play with Powerball. I want to say 6 or 7 years apart.
Yeah, something like that, right? So
Right.
Sung played with Powerball in high school,
Right.
and Juan is playing with him on the Knicks.
Right. You described Sung as quote unsettled by this. Well, this is Juan as the narrator. There are multiple narrators. He's quote unsettled by being Korean, while Juan is grounded. I wonder how so that Robert Sung felt unsettled in his Korean.
Yeah, so Sung is adopted. I'm adopted. And one is I don't think he's exactly the best authority, I think, on who Robert really is,
Huh.
because of the similarities between them, and because of the anxiety one has about like whether or not he'll end up like Song, as kind of like the second fiddle, and then not
Mm,
really having a career, um, even though he has this, short couple week winning streak and it blasts him into stardom.
mhm,
I think there was always a sense, even with Insanity, that how long will this last,
mhm,
right? Either like how long will this last from the negative perspective, or
mhm,
how long will this last from my perspective. Was like, there's no way this could keep going forever, right? Like, but
mm,
I wish it would.
right.
Um, and so one kind of has the anxiety surrounding what will happen when it comes to an end. Will he
Mhm,
be seen the same way as Robert Sung is
mm,
seen? And then kind of compounded with that is this, the way in which adoptees are kind of a part of the Korean American community or part of the Asian American community,
mhm,
but also are kind of this weird outlier to that community, or sometimes seen as an outlier to that community,
mm,
as people who weren't adopted.
mm. Again, one or you as the author described, one of the main quote unquote plots for Robert Sung is Powerball. Like his career in many ways was ended through an accidental injury where he stepped on, Powerball exclamation points, foot. And then there's Brit. Remind me of her last name. I'm sorry.
Young.
Right. And Brit, was the beautiful one throughout high school and seemed to always be I don't know. I'm so interested too in what she saw actually in Powerball. She doesn't seem to be the necessary. You do a great job of just, mixing up these tropes, I guess, right? She could be like the career like the climber, social climber. She just wants to latch on. But she also does, charity things quietly, doesn't ask for publicity, and she's not a huge basketball fan. She's not necessarily like seemingly drawn to him because of basketball. So, again, love triangle. I wonder what she maybe initially saw in Powerball in Paul Burton.
Yeah, so I'm playing with this kind of like everybody has a public face, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that's probably not really who they actually are.
Yeah.
And so from the outside, I think it definitely looks like, if you were to look at this relationship between Britt and Powerball, Britt, who was like a child star,
Mm-hmm.
and Powerball, who was it was an up and coming basketball player, as a kind of like attachment to fame, right? Like her fame might run out, but his was just kind of starting.
Sure.
And yet then there was this other person kind of following around Robert Sung, totally in love with her, totally
Mm-hmm.
devoted to her, would do anything for her.
Mm-hmm.
But she rejects him in the end for Powerball. I mean, I think from the outside that looks like one thing, but from the inside, I don't know that people are really usually that attracted to somebody who's like kind of following them
Right.
around, right? And
Right.
kind
Right.
of
Right.
do let you know
Kind of
that can
pathetic in
kind
the
of
true sense of the
yeah,
word, right?
exactly. And
Yeah.
so the person who seems like they can stand on their own and likes you,
Okay.
right? The person who kind of has a strong sense of individuality,
Mm.
that might be a more attractive choice than. But after years of that person, Powerball cheating on her and doing, like not treating her super great,
Right.
it might, devotion might look pretty good.
Hmm. So with one, they're 7-1. I believe seven in a row to begin, right?
Yeah.
And he's just on fire. He's scoring 20, 30, 40 points. It's an absolute hysteria and frenzy around the city of New York and just around the country, maybe around the world, the diaspora, the Korean diaspora. And then after, so the big thing is that he got his chance because Powerball was, had his injury. He comes back. They're all saying the right things. Yeah, we'll be able to work together. But they actually go 0-5 after he comes back. Um, the coach, who's not really um, described a lot other than the way that he acts towards one, and as you say so well in Craft in the Real World, to mix the two books, you talk about it. You say something to the effect of, I'm not so worried about micro versus macro aggressions, like racism is racism. I'm worried about the effects, etc. Were How did the coach deal with one in a racist or microaggressive way, in the way that he
Yeah. So
played
the
him or talked to
coach,
him?
um, so the coach kind of is forced to play one, right?
Okay.
And doesn't really has never given him a chance and never seen him as somebody capable of having any success. And then when he does have success, the coach sees him as like, the success is mine for making like the brave
Mm-hmm.
decision to play this person.
Hmm.
Right. And so you've got to like represent me, and you should feel, um, appreciative of the chance that I gave you.
Right.
And the coach also knows, and one knows too, that the leader of the team is Powerball, right? And so they've got to kind of fit together. But one is just kind of getting his legs under him, and he's facing an unguaranteed contract and like
Mm-hmm.
the undetermined future. And the coach is, not really kind of seeing anything from his perspective, because to him, one is still like a person who just kind of lucked into this thing,
Right.
but didn't really deserve it.
Right. You write about subtle racism. The all-star voting is that one actually gets voted in, but it's like, oh well, the people in Asia, they're voting too many times. Like, does this count? There's the racial epithet like in the headline. Well, it's not an epithet on its own, but it serves as one. Which I know is probably ties back to Jeremy Lin. There were some racist statements made towards him, of course, publicly, and I'm sure not publicly. But I also wondered, I guess, just back to Robert Sung, like in his relationship with one, like, is there something about them externally, like society in quotes, kind of pitting them against each other, as well as maybe the way that they felt that they were kind of like in competition?
You can you say that again?
Just like I guess you talk. One describes how he's lonely in some ways, right? And Robert Sung, as well, lonely for different reasons, some of the same. I guess just like, do you feel that they are pitted against each other by society, with in quotes, or themselves? They kind of play that up, that their competitiveness against each other.
Yeah, it's a sort of like scarcity model, right?
Okay.
Like if there's only a couple of you, then you suddenly are in competition.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I remember even just being one of only a few Asians in school, all through my childhood,
Mm-hmm.
um, not wanting to associate with other Asian American kids because,
Mm-hmm.
right, it felt like then I was just the other Asian kid, right? Or,
Okay.
right? Like, and I felt like I had to individuate myself in some way.
Mm.
And then there's all the other kind of like similarities about them, right? That put them even more together. And so there's this kind of like feeling of wanting to support, or one wants to be like on Sung's side, but also
Okay.
is feeling this kind of pressure from outside and feeling the pressure from Sung's side, this kind of envy or
Mm.
tension between them. And so can't they're like connected, but not really connected.
Hmm. There's a great line earlier in the book about some of the effect of like the the person you envy better be good because it's it's embarrassing to envy
Right.
someone
Who
who's
wants
not,
to
right?
envy somebody who's not the best? Yeah.
Right. I just felt like that was like so representative of almost of like people who like loving sports, you know what I mean? Like your team wins, your team. Like what does that even mean? Like my
Yeah,
team is
yeah.
better than your team. Like okay, like you don't play. All right. So there's, with again with try not to get too many plot spoilers. This is such a great read. So many plot, not like huge plot twists, but so much going on. We haven't gotten to the K drama part and like this more the second half, but so there's some ideas of fidelity or lack thereof, right?
Right.
Between the husband and wife, and such. You talked about that with Powerball, and you talked about the public face. He's shown it to be vulnerable. The whole egging scene. He's shown to be a really good father. The video game scene and him calming his kids down even when he was not calm. But also, and then there's that scene that is so uncomfortable, which is a huge compliment to you. It is so well done. The scene there at the All-Star game, they go out in Koreatown in LA, and it's like he's literally in one ear. I'm talking about one. In one ear, he's got Powerball telling him to like do this to the girl, to this woman who's into him, and the other is the woman saying, I want to do this to you. That scene is so, like I said, icky in the most positive way. What I guess what is that like a microcosm for? What is that symbolic of, or is it just like, hey, let it be on its own?
I think it's this kind of all the desire that one has wrapped up in like trying to be like Powerball, stand on his own, and then he's in Koreatown, right? He's in K Town where he's Korean, and it's like he's a big deal in this one place, right? And then you've got this person right next to you who's like the person you've looked up to your entire
Mm-hmm.
life, and I think it can kind of get in your head, and it can, the things. I don't think our desires usually are very straightforward.
Mm.
There's this
Yeah.
idea about desire called mimetic desire, where like you have desires because other people have the desire, right? Like
Mm.
it's how advertising works. You see somebody beautiful with this thing, and you
Yes.
think I must have that thing, and then I'll be beautiful.
Right.
Um, and so to have somebody who has everything that you want
Mm-hmm.
have a sort of desire also gives you that kind of desire, and you start to like think that in order to have that life you have to have the things that that other person desires, and you kind
Sure.
of lose sight of your own wants.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean the book. You could read it just as a basketball fan, and it's just great drama. There's, like you talk about mimetic drama. What was the term you used? I'm sorry.
Desire.
Mimetic desire, right? I mean, it's like psychological terms, and there's just so much going on, including, there's a story within a story. There's multiple stories within this book, about K drama. So we've got Carrie Kang. She's met one kind of in the middle of his greatness, right?
Yeah, so she meets him before the season starts and they start dating. But yeah, they're kind of in a new relationship while all of this is happening. And then she's also dealing with her sister has been diagnosed with cancer, and so
Right.
there's this kind of like all of this new wonder in life on one side, and then
Uh-huh.
all of this kind of like threat of death on the other side. And then
Sure.
she's, her job is as a producer of K dramas, and so she's kind of flying back and forth to Korea, trying to keep this industry a part of her life and bring it from Korea to America.
Hmm. There's obviously a lot about barriers to her as a woman, barriers to her, in Korea as an American, quote unquote, in America as a Korean American. And she writes about like race as a cake, the like, right, you captured that whole is it cake, that YouTube phenomenon. Is that over
Yeah.
yet? I don't know. Is that over yet? What do you? I hope so.
I'm not sure. My kids just watched that show on Netflix, the Is a Cake
Oh, that's
show.
right.
Yeah. So who knows? It's a pretty cool thing in some ways, but it's also like such a good encapsulation of our culture, right?
Sure, sure. Again, these two books work so well together. I'm talking about Craft in the World, where she writes about at times, I mean, feeling that she lacks this free will and agency that white men, for sure, that white people just assume, and that comes out so well in Craft in the Real World. Just wonders about what power do we have over fate? Like you said, her sister has stage 4 cancer. There's her husband is kind of like, hey, let's straight and narrow, no jokes about this.
Oh,
Let's
her sister's husband, yeah. Mhm.
Right, her sister's husband, excuse me, and then while she talking about Kay, she's acknowledging her grief more openly, acknowledging her nerves and her feelings, and she even has a living funeral.
Yeah, yeah.
How would you? I mean, what an incredible idea! Like, what do you think she was trying to accomplish with her living funeral?
I mean, I think what she says in the book is something like, "What's the point of having everybody gather for me when I can't be there?" Right? I
Mm-hmm.
think there's something to that. I I was writing a bunch of Carrie's parts while my wife was getting chemo for stage 4 stomach cancer, and was thinking about a lot of the things that Carrie and her sister Kay have to think about as Kay is diagnosed with stage 4 stomach cancer, and um, so a lot of that experience is in the book, and a lot of that like wanting to live is in the book, and the idea that like I wish that we had had more opportunities, I think, to do this kinds of things or coming togethers that
Mm-hmm.
happen after somebody died. Like I got a lot of support, I think, after Catherine died, um and sometimes you wish those things happened during, and it's just, yeah, there's a strange way in which we see these different stages of dying and death, and what we can do in those different situations. Everybody will go to a funeral, right?
Right,
But
right.
will everybody kind of show up for somebody while they're dying?
Mm,
Not really.
yeah. Well, thanks again so much for sharing that in a fictionalized way in the book, and just thank you for sharing the personal story there. I mean, there's a line, so many lines that are so profound, and this
Thank
one's
you.
from the fictional book, but it says so much about our world. It's quote, I mean the limits of the body becoming the limits of itself. A cancer patient is never allowed to be anything but a cancer patient. That's what Kay hated the most. I can't say any
Yeah,
better than
that's
you.
what
I'm
my
not gonna.
wife hated the most for sure. She
Mm,
hated when people treated her like a patient.
right. So